Welcome back to Ethical Adulthood. And now, Season 3, Episode 10, the episode for which we've all been waiting. Episode 9 was about astrology, a map I approached with more hesitation than almost any other we have explored. I did not have a strong position one way or the other. To be honest, most of the maps that we've considered so far are not from my own culture or my own recent history or my family's contribution to my belief systems. So the reason we're doing a full-fledged second episode on a map I'm not even entirely sure about is that I have realized I'm less interested in astrology itself than I am in my own discernment and in the discernment of others. I met somebody this past weekend who absolutely refused to join with a map that she was convinced was silly. In fact, almost any map that didn't have science, pure science, as its spine was more or less rejected out of hand as being foolish. And that's fine, but that becomes a problem of discernment, I think, as well. Now, not necessarily a problem for her, but it would be a problem for me. Because as I begin to see myself grow more and more certain, I begin to feel more and more discomfort because I know that trap. But most people have discernment problems, quote unquote, that move in the other direction. They're so excited about the possibility of finding something they can be certain about. Their ability to use discernment weakens. So I am interested in my own and others' ability to be swayed, persuaded, led, and convinced to loosen our inhibitions around alternative frameworks. And by alternative, I mean outside our ability to experience something directly through science, sensation, perception, deep meditation, or self-inquiry. And as I said in the last episode, I've been approaching uncertain maps with less suspicion and more curiosity. So I devised an experiment, not a scientific one, more of what we might call a phenomenological exercise. I wanted to know whether an AI-generated reading of a natal chart would allow me to identify whose chart it was. At first, I fed it just 2 birthdays and saw if I could differentiate between 2 people I know. I got perfect scores 3 times in a row. But I did not give any time of birth at all in those little exercises. So what I did is I started with description A, and my mind immediately began fitting it to person A, and then counterfeiting it to person B, and then back to A. The description had enough elasticity that my brain could keep generating confirming examples for either person. Then I moved to description B, and suddenly the whole thing collapsed into certainty. The mind actively negotiates the fit. It searches memory. It weighs examples. It revises. It compares. It uses contrast. It settles. And once it's done wiggling around in the seat, well, the chair feels custom made. And once the memory of the wiggle disappears, well, you're just comfortable in the seat. But these were not serious attempts to test the map of astrology. They were just interesting to me. So I set up a fairly difficult test. 9 charts, 6 belonging to people I knew personally, and 3 belonging to celebrities: Clint Eastwood, Meryl Streep, and Dolly Parton. I went to AstroSeek and I entered the birth date, the city in which they were born, the time of birth for each person. I asked ChatGPT to produce a 1-page psychological description of each chart. I wanted something psychologically rich enough that, using my own training as a psychologist, I might be able to recognize the person from the description alone. I asked ChatGPT to remove gendered language, identifying details, and obvious astrological giveaways. Then I printed the 9 descriptions, printed the 9 names, and matched them. I was pretty confident, I have to tell you. The descriptions felt distinctive. I believed my understanding of each person was good enough that I could recognize their behavioral patterns. And there were a few places where 2 descriptions felt somewhat interchangeable, but overall, I thought I'd done pretty well. I got 2 out of 9 right. Pure chance would have been 1 out of 9 right. The probability of getting 2 out of 9 or better is about 26%. That's compatible with guessing. One that I got right was a girlfriend I know fairly well, although I've probably spent fewer than 100 hours with her. And the other was Dolly Parton. Of course it was Dolly Parton. And the misses were interesting. My cousin Robin, who I've known my entire life, though not exactly intimately, I confused with Clint Eastwood. I thought Clint was Robin and Robin was Clint. Dolly Parton, bingo. No hesitation at all. And I know almost nothing about her as a person, mostly her public persona, right? But her description, to me, it felt completely obvious. One chart I thought belonged to Ted, a 50-something-year-old male psychologist friend, and it belonged to Vera, my 24-year-old friend. And I thought Vera's chart belonged to Paul, a different 50-something-year-old male psychologist friend. Another chart that belonged to my friend Ted, well, I guessed Meryl Streep. To be fair, I don't know either of them terribly well. Meryl Streep's chart I assigned to my massage therapist. Interestingly, both Meryl and my massage therapist are Cancer suns. Also interestingly, I share a birthday with my massage therapist, a fact I did not know. And while we get along famously, I could not see anything like me in his chart. Of course, the times were different that we were born in, for sure. And that matters to the astrologer. And across the set, I found myself confusing the 3 Cancer sun charts for one another. A few possibilities occurred to me. Maybe these people genuinely share overlapping psychological themes. Maybe ChatGPT emphasized broad Cancer qualities more strongly than the unique signatures of the individual charts. Maybe the people themselves occupy similar psychological territory in my own mind, independent of astrology. The experiment can't tell me which of those explanations is correct, or even if there's an explanation that I'm not seeing that is or is not correct. What the experiment did show me was ambiguity and elasticity. And that elasticity became more interesting to me than the score. I could not say that my misses were statistically non-random. This was far too small and informal an experiment for that. But subjectively, the mistakes had structure. I tended to confuse people who already were psychologically adjacent to one another in my own mind. Whether that says something about astrology, my interpretation of the descriptions, ChatGPT's summaries, or simply the limits of how well I know these people, I could not tell. But the pattern was more interesting than the score. So I ran the experiment again. This time I asked Claude, which is arguably a drier, more scholarly robot, to interpret the charts, still using a traditional Western astrological approach and still asking it to produce a one-page psychological portrait. The experience was completely different. The first time, I had felt an almost immediate recognition. I would read the opening paragraph, attach a name, and move on. I finished quickly, and I never changed a single first impression. This time, I had no clue. I read the descriptions twice. I kept thinking, these could belong to almost anyone. Well, I did think I knew who Dolly was. Of course I thought I knew Dolly. So I just guessed. Again, I got two right. Vera and Dolly Parton. But once again, something about the misses caught my attention. You know, I swapped my cousin and Clint Eastwood again. Oh, I also confused my massage therapist with the same psychologist friend I had confused before. Both Cancer suns. So although the second set felt much less distinctive and much harder to match, some of the same pairings reappeared. That interested me. The first experiment produced high confidence and low accuracy. The second produced very low confidence and again, low accuracy. Two different chat box, same interpretive styles. Two very different subjective experiences, essentially the same outcome. At that point, I thought, all right, maybe the real limitation here isn't just me, it's the AI. So I reached out to a good friend of mine who's an actual astrologer, and I asked whether she would help me run a cleaner version of the experiment. She very kindly agreed. From her perspective, relying on AI was not really the same thing as having an astrologer read a chart, and that seemed like a fair criticism. So we simplified the experiment. Just 5 people this time, all friends of mine I felt I knew reasonably well. I ran the data through AstroDeist and supplied her with the charts. She used the chart data to produce a one-page summary for each person, removing sign and gender from the descriptions. And then she sent them to me randomized as letters. I matched the 5 descriptions to the 5 names. Now, I want you to know that I had somebody else run those charts. And I did not have any memory of any one of those people's birthdays. I just don't know. So we've removed this underneath, I know that one of them is a Taurus or something like that. I did not know any data about any of my 5 friends. And I can't read a natal chart. It looks like math to me in a math class I've never had. So I sent her my matches, and this time I again found the task fairly easy, and I was pretty confident I got all or most of them right. Yeah, there were 2 descriptions I wasn't entirely certain about, And I thought about swapping them, but by the end, I felt confident in my choices. Even though they felt interchangeable, there was enough in there that I was pretty confident I was making the right decision. I really thought I was going to get them all right. It would have been a triumph. I got 2 out of 5. Statistically, still about a 26% probability. The one that I wasn't sure about, I was wrong about. So if I give myself some grace, I could have gotten 3 out of 5. That's about a 9% probability. Better, but it's not the 5% threshold that's required for statistical significance. Better, but not great. And as we talked about the charts, I began to see how my friends were actually well described by the charts that they matched with. A bit of wiggling, and yep, this makes sense. Here are some things I think I learned from this exercise. First, astrology is built from symbols that point toward experiences almost all human beings recognize. And I used traditional Western astrology, which makes the map even more finely differentiated. Remember, there are a dozen or so methods of reading a natal chart. Mercury speaks to thinking, communication, curiosity, interpretation. It's the quicksilver back and forth of daily life. Venus points toward attraction, pleasure, comfort, taste, attachment, and what we value enough to cultivate. Mars represents assertion, momentum, desire, action, the part of us that pushes, competes, pursues, and says, I want this. Jupiter expands. It explores, learns, reaches, risks, and looks toward a larger horizon. These are ordinary, usual human experiences. We all communicate. We all desire. We all attach. We all assert ourselves. We all grow. We all encounter loss, conflict, pleasure, responsibility, uncertainty, and transformation. Astrology begins by giving those recurring human experiences names and symbols. Then it places them somewhere. This, astrologers tell us, is what the chart is able to do. It's able to make the chart become individual. There's more, of course, but this is the crux of the map. Mars in the first house might be interpreted as boldness or forcefulness becoming part of the way someone enters the world. But put Mars in the 7th house, that same energy moves into partnership, directness in relationships, conflict, attraction to strong personalities, learning through one-to-one encounters. Put Mars in the 10th, and now drive and ambition are being expressed through achievement, reputation, or vocation. The symbolic energy of Mars stays the same, but the arena changes. Sit with that for a moment. We all have boldness in us somewhere. Being told it's in one area more than another can feel a little bit like, if I just wiggle a bit, it's all that's necessary for it to be true. And that's where I began noticing the extraordinary elasticity of the system. Take a person who has Mars in the 7th house. If that person is forceful in relationships, well, the chart fits. If that person is somewhat more reserved but repeatedly chooses forceful partners, the chart can still fit. If the important relationship is not romantic but professional, or familial, or therapeutic, or adversarial? Well, the seventh house concerns all one-to-one relationships. The category can stretch. Venus in the sixth house might mean warmth expressed through daily routines and care. But that care could also be directed toward a spouse, or a garden, or dogs, or students, or a spiritual practice, or the workbench in the garage. Again, the symbol is not meaningless, quite the opposite. It's meaningful enough to travel. And I love this about this map. It's truly a gift to be able to wiggle a very little bit and feel situated immediately. But it begs the question, at what point does the symbolic breadth help us see something important, and at what point does it become so elastic that almost any life can be mapped onto it? Or if that life can't be mapped onto it, then maybe there's an explanation somewhere that makes the sky not the thing in error. My astrologer friends have an answer for that, and I want to give it to you straight because they are not dumb answers. One said the methodology of the chart was not a good fit for all of the people involved. One subject, for instance, was clearly not born in the West. Another said, well, maybe the person is in denial about themselves and their path. Maybe their spiritual tradition is keeping them from seeing a different angle on truth. Oh, maybe the generational planetary configuration makes them so one way that the details in their chart are less dramatic than the generational influences. But hey, let me be clear. A story can be broad and still be useful. How do I mean? Well, dreams are broad. Myths are broad. Archetypes are broad. The recurring developmental tensions of being human are broad. Belonging and exile, attachment and autonomy, control and surrender, shame and pride, love and loss, death and renewal. We keep telling the same stories because there's only so many fundamental things human beings have to wrestle with. The details change, the costumes change, the century changes, but our stories and our nervous systems, they hardly change at all. And so a chart read cold can often be mapped surprisingly well onto the person for whom it was written. Give the reader a little more information, their age, their apparent gender, their generation, their occupation, their body language, the historical moment into which someone was born, the possibilities of hits multiply. Put a skilled human being across from another human being, and now something even more interesting happens. The astrologer is no longer reading only a chart. The astrologer is reading a person. A person walks into the room confidently or timidly. A person is playful or guarded or skeptical or eager. A person lights up at one interpretation and becomes still at another. A skilled reader notices. Not necessarily consciously. or even deliberately. And the reading changes. Certain themes become more prominent, others recede. Meanings become more specific. The symbolic map and the living person, well, they begin interacting with one another. And the result can feel downright uncanny. I know this because I've done something very similar myself. I'm familiar with a form of tantric numerology used within the Kundalini yoga tradition. It maps numbers from a person's birthday onto what Yogi Bhajan called the 10 bodies. Put those numbers into a free online calculator and the interpretation can be remarkably flat. But give those same symbols to me with my training and I can read them developmentally, symbolically, through humanistic psychology, through Jungian ideas, and through decades of observing people. And suddenly the reading gets rich. Sometimes astonishingly rich. I don't need someone's biography, but I'm not working blind either. I have probably seen this person in a yoga class. I know roughly what generation they belong to. I know their apparent gender, usually. I know how they carry themselves. I know whether they seem playful. And I deliberately tell them that the numerology reading is a parlor game. And almost immediately, people relax. They smile. And the encounter becomes playful. And so now we've entered a shared reality. The symbols, they just give us something to talk about. I offer an interpretation, something lands. I offer another interpretation, that one doesn't. We explore what's alive. And sometimes it feels like magic. But I am increasingly suspicious that the magic is not contained entirely in the numbers. It may be contained in the encounter. The symbolic framework gives me prompts. My psychological training gives me pattern recognition. The other person gives me information simply by being a person in front of me. And together we make meaning. That does not make the experience fraudulent. It may explain why it works. And it helped me reconsider what I was actually asking astrology to do. If astrology is claiming to function like a scientifically reliable assessment instrument, if the natal chart itself can uniquely and objectively tell us who a person is, well, then I think my little experiments give us some reason for skepticism. I knew these people. I had multiple descriptions. I was confident. And over, I attached compelling descriptions to the wrong human beings. When an actual astrologer prepared the readings, I still did not suddenly become able to identify everybody. And when I shared the chart with my friends, they picked out some things that resonated that I didn't think did. And I felt less certain about things I thought were spot on and definitive. So the feeling of, oh my God, that's exactly me, cannot by itself be evidence that the chart uniquely describes the person. A convincing fit is weaker evidence than it feels like. Even when you do multiple people in one sitting and discover remarkable explanations for behaviors, traits, circumstances, and events. But goodness of fit is not the only possible standard by which to judge a symbolic practice. Astrology may be less useful as a diagnostic instrument than as one we use to reflect upon our own personal truths. It can call our attention to areas of our lives we had stopped noticing or stopped attending to, or left in the arena of, I don't know why I'm like this. It can reveal familiar terrain as rougher or gentler, more hidden or more conflicted than we had allowed ourselves to perceive. If I use the IFS framework, it's internal family systems. If I use the IFS framework, it can give us language for parts of ourself that are in exile, parts of ourselves that are managers, protectors, or firefighters. And maybe, perhaps, for the characteristic ways our system expresses itself when self is leading. The map can allow us to feel seen, heard, and understood in a way we've never experienced before. Especially if we come from a family where we were not seen correctly. That really matters. It can invite us to look at love, ambition, fear, family, work, belonging, desire, loss, or purpose from an unfamiliar angle. And even if 30% of a reading feels uncannily relevant and 70% disappears almost immediately, that 30% will become useful if one's motivated. And maybe it is because the sky at the time of our birth has given us clues to our life path and terrain. But also, even without that certainty, something in the symbolism has caught our attention. And where our attention lands matters. What we attend to becomes more salient. What we repeatedly encounter can begin to feel true. And a felt truth can easily become a personal truth. I would not tell someone not to spend a couple of $100 on a thoughtful 3-hour reading from an astrologer who's spent 10 years or more studying the craft. We all spend money on all sorts of experiences that do not provide objective measurement. We pay for art, we pay for rituals, conversations, retreats. We pay for stories and reflections. A skilled astrologer may offer close attention, symbolic fluency, pattern recognition, imagination, and a structured opportunity to think about one's life. That can be worth something. The trouble might begin when that usefulness becomes certainty. I asked my astrologer friend what had been the tipping point for her. What had allowed astrology to move from an interesting or useful map into something closer to ultimate truth for her. Her answer had me nodding along, as I have parallels in my own life. So I will tell you that the only reason I am a Kundalini yoga teacher is because this friend I've been telling you about, / astrologer, was also my teacher. And I never would have committed to the practice and the training and the 15 years of subsequent teaching and my ordinary daily practice today if it had not been for this one influential person. Anyway, here's what she said. First, people she deeply respected believed it. Then, someone charismatic, knowledgeable, and trusted spoke about the chart not as metaphor, but as reality. Of course it works. It's mathematics. It's angles and geometry. The soul leaves us a map in the stars. And once that explanatory system is complete enough, contradictory evidence can become very difficult to recognize. If the chart fits, the chart is right. If the chart doesn't fit, perhaps the person has not yet understood the chart. Perhaps the person is out of alignment. Perhaps the person has not discovered that part of the self yet. Perhaps the map is revealing something unconscious. Notice what has happened. The map has become unfalsifiable. The map cannot be wrong. It's only our understanding of the map, or our understanding of ourselves, that can be wrong. And that's the point at which my interest moves away from astrology altogether and toward epistemology. How do we know what we think we know? Let's make a distinction between personal truth and objective truth. A personal truth can organize a life. It can be sacred. It can be meaningful. It can even transform someone. But objective truth asks something different of us. It asks whether the claim survives when other people test it independently. It asks whether there's a way for the claim to fail. It asks whether contradictory evidence changes our degree of confidence. Personal truths are enormously powerful in our own lives. Objective truths are part of all our lives, of all our currently shared reality. Objective truths can be improved upon, updated, changed, or discarded according to the available evidence and the tools we have to explore reality. And ethical adulthood, I think, requires knowing which category that we're in. Personal truth is personal. Objective truth is provisional. Neither gives us absolute certainty, but objective truth has to remain answerable to evidence. Certainty itself isn't actually the problem with a map, as long as it matches the terrain. I know ethical, loving people who are profoundly certain about things I cannot know. They are walking on their map, and it is perfectly in alignment with their terrain. Certainty can be beautiful in the hands of someone who uses a beloved map like numerology, astrology, or tarot benevolently, humbly, and with the consent of the person standing in front of them. It becomes dangerous when the map outranks the person. When someone says, "But this is who you really are." When the map or the chart is trusted more than the human being describing a lived experience. When uncertainty becomes evidence of spiritual failure. When disagreement proves only that the skeptic has not yet awakened. This is not an astrology problem. This is a human problem. We do it all the time. We can do it with religion. We can do it with psychology. We can do it with politics, medicine, spirituality, personality systems, science, AI chatbots, any map that becomes dangerous when we forget that it is a map. And ethical adulthood is hard precisely because it asks us to keep remembering life, and we are too complex to ever fully be mapped. Ethical adulthood asks us to notice when we're wrong, to go back, to correct ourselves, to tolerate the embarrassment of having been certain yesterday about something we are less certain about today. 0 people enjoy this. We do it anyway. My astrologer friend and teacher, who, let me say, easily one of the finest human beings I know, said something else during our conversation. She told me that the way I was approaching all of this sounded Buddhist. A Buddhist, she says, analyzes everything from every direction and eventually comes to 2 conclusions. 1, I don't know. It's both and neither. And 2, well, maybe it doesn't matter in quite the way I thought it did. And now I see, absolutely, I have to do an episode on Buddhism. But before we leave astrology, I want to say this. I did not come out of these experiments believing that natal charts can reliably identify an individual human being. I did come out of them understanding more clearly why intelligent, thoughtful people can have profoundly meaningful experiences with astrology. And why we are quicker to adopt and confirm certainty than we will adopt and confirm the need for accuracy. So yeah, all of those things can be true. Astrology can be scientifically uncertain and psychologically generative. A reading can contain projection and still produce insight. An astrologer can be wrong about the mechanism and extraordinarily skilled at helping another human being see something important. The map can be imperfect and the journey worthwhile. We do not have to choose between credulity and contempt. We can be skeptical without sneering. We can be curious without surrendering discernment. Folks, we can appreciate a map without mistaking it for the territory. This is Ethical Adulthood. I'm Andrea Fiondo. Thanks for listening. I'll see you next time.